June 6, 1944, the day the world turned toward the shores of Normandy. Amid the thunder of artillery and the chaos of Operation Overlord, not every man who landed on Omaha Beach came to fight. Some came to build, to bury, and to vanish. Hidden beneath the roar of battle was a mission so secret that even its name, Operation Tidefall, was never entered into official U.S. Army records. In the pre-dawn darkness, while landing craft bobbed in the cold English Channel, a dozen men from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers huddled on the deck of a converted Higgins boat. They were attached to the 1st Infantry Division, the famed Big Red One. Yet their orders came from a different source. No insignia, no paperwork, just a single envelope marked for commander's eyes only. Inside, hand-drawn coordinates, a depth measurement, and one line of instruction: construct, conceal, and withdraw. The engineers had trained for months under the guise of cable laying and logistics, but this mission was different. Their commanding officer, Captain Walter Haynes, a 32-year-old civil engineer from Ohio, had been handpicked for his discretion. "We're not building a bridge today, boys," he told his team as they neared the shore. "We're laying history to rest." The words hung in the salty air, half drowned by the scream of shells falling over the surf. When the ramp dropped at 6:45, chaos erupted. Machine gun fire from German positions on the bluffs tore through the first wave. Yet somehow Haynes's team made it ashore with minimal loss, hauling heavy wooden crates marked only with stenciled letters. No serials, no destinations. The crates were sealed with lead, their weight suggesting something more than munitions. Private Daniel Ward later recalled in his diary, "We carried them like coffins." And in a way, that's what they were. Their destination lay half a mile inland, near the village of Vierville-sur-Mer. Under cover of artillery smoke, they began their real task, not to dig trenches, but to carve a chamber into the earth. The men used pneumatic drills and demolition charges, working in silence while other units fought for the ridge above. Haynes told them the structure was for command relay equipment, though the dimensions, 12 feet deep, reinforced with steel beams, suggested something meant to last decades, not weeks. By nightfall, they'd completed the frame of what resembled an underground vault. The crates were lowered inside, one by one, under the flickering light of a single carbide lamp. Lieutenant Charles Emery, the team's explosives expert, asked quietly, "Sir, why bury something when we're trying to push forward?" Haynes paused, then replied, "Because some victories depend on what we hide, not what we show." That line would haunt the surviving men for the rest of their lives. The following day, the tide rose high enough to flood the lower trench, forcing them to work through knee-deep water to seal the chamber. They poured quick-drying cement, installed a false gravel top, and finally, on June 8th, placed a single wooden plank across the site. Its surface burned with the words, "No entry, communications line." Anyone glancing at it would assume it was just another battlefield installation. But not everyone was convinced. One of the younger corporals, a radio operator named Thomas Greeley, had grown uneasy about the secrecy. He whispered to a comrade that he planned to ask Captain Haynes what was really inside the crates. The next morning, Greeley was gone. No trace. No report. Haynes told the men he'd been reassigned to a beach clearing detail. Yet his personal effects, dog tags, diary, even his rations, remained in his pack. In the years that followed, veterans of the Big Red One spoke of many strange moments from D-Day, but none so quietly as this one. The mystery of Operation Tidefall became a ghost story among engineers, a classified mission beneath the sands of Omaha Beach. Officially, the U.S. Army never recorded any such operation, nor did the Corps of Engineers list a Captain Haynes in its 1944 rosters. It was as if both the man and his mission had been erased. A single fragment of evidence survived, a letter, discovered decades later among Haynes's personal effects, sent to his wife from a London field post just days before D-Day. It read, "If we succeed, no one will know. If we fail, no one must." Those 13 words became the only known clue to what was buried beneath the beaches of Normandy. Perhaps that's the cruelest truth of war. Not all secrets are lost to the enemy. Some are buried by those we trust most. As the waves continue to break on Omaha Beach, the tides wash over the same ground where Haynes's men worked through fire and fear. Somewhere beneath those sands, sealed in silence, lies the beginning of one of World War II's most enduring mysteries, a secret mission that began not with conquest, but concealment. By June 9, 1944, the sound of battle had begun to fade from Omaha Beach, but for Captain Walter Haynes and the remnants of his engineer detachment, the real war had only just begun. Their secret vault, disguised as a cable junction, was now complete. Yet the men were ordered to remain on site for 48 more hours, long enough to ensure no one else discovered it. In the official after-action reports, their names appeared under a different unit entirely, the 299th Engineer Combat Battalion, noted for clearing mines and laying communications lines. In reality, they were guarding something no one was supposed to find. The site itself was ingeniously hidden. Haynes had chosen a natural depression between two hedgerows near Vierville-sur-Mer, just above the high tide line. Once sealed, the chamber blended perfectly with the terrain. The engineers layered gravel, barbed wire, and camouflage netting above it, leaving what appeared to be a ruined section of trench. If you didn't know where to look, Private Ward later said, you'd walk right over it without a second thought. But the secrecy weighed heavily on the men. After Corporal Thomas Greeley's disappearance, whispers spread through the ranks. Some claimed he'd been caught prying open one of the sealed crates. Others said he drowned in a shell crater trying to escape. The truth was no one saw him again, and Captain Haynes refused to discuss it. Focus on the work, he ordered. The less we asked, the longer we lived. On the afternoon of June 10th, the men received an unexpected visit. A small jeep arrived from the beachhead, carrying a British intelligence officer in civilian clothes. He identified himself only as Major Sinclair, though no such name appeared in Allied records. He carried a clipboard marked Zoe, Directive 91A. After examining the site, he spoke quietly with Haynes out of earshot. When he left an hour later, the atmosphere had changed. The men were told to dismantle their camp immediately. That night, Haynes burned all field notes, sketches, and personal logs related to the mission. Later, in his private field journal, recovered decades afterward, Sergeant Frank Leland wrote, "The captain looked different after that meeting. Paler. He said our work was finished, but his eyes said otherwise. I think we buried more than boxes." By dawn, the team was reassigned to clearing obstacles near Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer, blending back into the flow of post-invasion chaos. No one asked about the vault again, at least not aloud. But small inconsistencies began to surface. Their pay records listed extra hazard compensation under an unfamiliar code. Supply manifests showed equipment checked out but never returned, 2 pneumatic drills, 1 portable generator, and 3 crates of dynamite. Someone somewhere had erased their trail, but not perfectly. Months later, when the Normandy campaign pushed deeper into France, the unit was split up. Captain Haynes was transferred to the 1110th Engineer Group in Belgium, but his file abruptly ends in September 1944. Missing presumed Kia is all the War Department ever noted. No witness statements, no battlefield report. Just gone. Decades later, historians piece together fragments from oral testimonies and surviving letters. One striking detail emerged from a 1945 interview with a U.S. Signal Corps officer. We had reports of interference, radio static coming from underground near Vierville. It wasn't German. It was something else. The comment was dismissed at the time, attributed to faulty wiring or residual charges in the sand. Yet, it aligned eerily with the coordinates found in Haynes's orders. War doesn't end when the guns go silent, wrote journalist Evelyn Harker years later, investigating unlisted wartime operations. It ends when the secrets stop whispering. And in Normandy, they never did. Her words would rekindle interest in Operation Tidefall decades after the war, but for those who lived it, silence was survival. Modern historians often debate the ethics of classified missions like these. What justifies burying history under concrete and oath? The engineers at Omaha were told they were preserving national security, but what if they were burying evidence, not equipment? As one veteran remarked, every secret has a price. We just didn't know we'd already paid it. Before the team's final dispersal, Sergeant Leland reportedly asked Haynes if he could at least mark the site on a private map. Haynes refused. Some things, he said, are safer without names. Those were his last known words before disappearing from record altogether. By the time Allied forces liberated Paris, Operation Tidefall had already slipped into obscurity, buried under both sand and bureaucracy. But the questions it raised, what was hidden, who ordered it, and why, remained like unspent ammunition beneath the surface of history. As the tides reclaimed the beaches, the engineers who had dug that secret chamber returned home, carrying memories they could never share. A few tried to speak of it later in life, but the official response was always the same, no record found. And so Chapter 2 closes not with the roar of battle, but with a quiet suffocation of silence, a silence that would last for decades, until a curious journalist stumbled upon a single phrase in a declassified memo: Tidefall location, Omaha sector, buried and sealed, per Directive 91A. Next comes the question that would drive our investigation, and the next chapter: who ordered the burial beneath Omaha Beach, and what was so dangerous it had to be forgotten? By 1945, Europe was scarred but free. The beaches of Normandy, once soaked in blood and smoke, had begun to quiet under the weight of victory. Yet beneath the calm surface of Omaha Beach, something remained buried, and for the men who had been part of Operation Tidefall, peace was an illusion. The war might have ended, but their silence was far from over. Sergeant Frank Leland returned to Ohio that autumn, discharged with honors and a modest pension. He married, worked construction, and never spoke of his service. But in a faded 1946 diary discovered by his grandson decades later, one passage stood out. They told us it was communications gear. Maybe it was, but I can still see the look on Haynes's face when the crates were sealed. Fear, not pride. Like we just locked away something meant to stay in the dark. Leland wasn't the only one haunted by the memory. Two other engineers, Privates Daniel Ward and Joseph Carter, tried to contact military archives in the early 1950s, seeking confirmation of their service record. Both received identical responses: no record of assignment to classified operation or officer named Walter Haynes. Within months, both men died under odd circumstances. Ward reportedly fell from scaffolding at a construction site. Carter died in a vehicle accident while en route to Washington, D.C. No connection was ever proven, but among surviving veterans a whisper spread: the Tidefall men are being erased. What the engineers couldn't have known was that the vault they built had begun to attract attention elsewhere. During post-war reconstruction, French locals near Vierville-sur-Mer noticed strange subsidence in the fields overlooking the beach, ground that seemed to shift after heavy rain. A farmer named Henri Dupont claimed he'd uncovered part of a concrete roof while plowing. The area was soon declared off-limits by U.S. military authorities, citing unexploded ordnance. It was a convenient cover. Meanwhile, Allied intelligence agencies were reorganizing under new banners. The OSS had dissolved, giving birth to the CIA, while British SOE records were sealed indefinitely. But buried in the transfer logs was a single cryptic entry from August 1945, Directive 91A, materials secured, status classified under bilateral operations UTA/U.K. No details, no explanation, just the same directive Major Sinclair had carried to the Omaha site. In 1962, nearly 2 decades later, an aging Army clerk named Robert Ellison stumbled across Haynes's personnel file, or rather, what was left of it. Dozens of pages were missing, entire sections replaced by black bars. But one notation caught his eye: attached Special Operations Group, June 1944, Non-Combat Engineering, Confidential Burial. When Ellison tried to request further clarification, he was transferred within the week and ordered never to discuss the matter. He did, however, confide in a journalist before his death: they didn't want the truth about what we buried. It wasn't weapons. It was knowledge. The theory that emerged years later was chilling. Some historians believed Operation Tidefall involved early experiments with battlefield cryptography, prototype signal devices intended for post-invasion intelligence coordination. Others suspected something even more guarded: captured access research, perhaps documents or technology deemed too dangerous to transport openly across the channel. But if that were true, why destroy all records of the mission? Why erase the men involved? A fragment of Captain Haynes's handwriting, preserved on a torn envelope, may hold a clue. The words read, "Better buried by friends than found by enemies." It suggests not the concealment of a weapon, but of an idea, something powerful enough to threaten both sides. The toll on the men was heavy. Those who survived carried invisible scars, living half-lives of denial and doubt. The official silence surrounding Operation Tidefall mirrored the broader trauma of post-war soldiers, men unable to speak, not only because of classified orders, but because no one wanted to believe them. "It's easier to forget," wrote one veteran, "than to remember what they made us hide," and that's where the story takes its darkest turn. In late 1962, the same year Ellison uncovered the redacted file, a local Normandy excavation team accidentally detonated what they thought was an unexploded mine near Vierville-sur-Mer. The small blast exposed fragments of reinforced concrete and a rusted steel beam engraved with U.S. Army production numbers from 1944. Before the team could investigate further, the area was abruptly cordoned off by American officials. Within days, the crater was filled, and the site reclassified as a restricted memorial zone. For those who had long suspected Operation Tidefall's existence, this was the first tangible sign it had been real. But the discovery also revived old fears among surviving engineers. A letter from a former Tidefall member, written in trembling script, summed up their unease. "We sealed something under the sand, and it's still alive down there. Not breathing, not moving, but alive in memory. If they open it, they'll have to bury it again." The disappearance of Captain Haynes, the deaths of his men, the cover-ups, and the soil shifting beneath Omaha Beach all pointed toward one truth. Whatever was hidden beneath Normandy was never meant to be found. By the 1970s, the world had moved on. The Normandy beaches were now peaceful, lined with memorials, tour buses, and the hum of cameras capturing the stories of bravery and sacrifice. But beneath the sand and sea grass near Vierville-sur-Mer, something remained hidden, and one woman was determined to find it. Her name was Evelyn Harker, a British journalist and historian who had made her reputation exposing Cold War intelligence archives. In 1971, she stumbled upon a brief reference in a British National Archives file titled Post-War Operations, Anglo-American Coordination, 1944-45. Among hundreds of routine entries, one phrase caught her eye: Joint Concealment Exercise, Omaha Sector, Ref. Directive 91A. It was the same code Major Sinclair had carried 27 years earlier. Harker had been a war correspondent's daughter, raised among veterans who rarely spoke about what they'd seen. "My father used to say," she later wrote, "the war didn't end when we won. It ended when we forgot." That thought haunted her as she began to pull the threads of Operation Tidefall. What started as a side note in a file soon became an obsession. Her research led her first to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers archives in Washington, D.C., where she discovered an entire section of microfilm labeled Restricted Communications Installations in Normandy. Within those reels, every reference to Vierville-sur-Mer had been neatly removed. Page numbers skipped inexplicably. Field reports ended mid-sentence. "Someone didn't just classify this," Harker told a colleague. "They erased it." Determined to go further, she tracked down surviving members of the 299th Engineer Combat Battalion. Most refused to speak, either out of fear or fading memory. But one widowed wife, Ellen Leland, the spouse of Sergeant Frank Leland, agreed to meet her in Columbus, Ohio. Over tea, she handed Evelyn a small tin box. Inside was her late husband's diary, the same one that mentioned burying more than boxes. In the margins of one entry, Harker found something astonishing: a hand-drawn map of the Omaha sector, with a small X marked inland from the Dog Green sector. Next to it, 3 words written in pencil: Vault under wire. It matched the coordinates that had appeared in a 1944 cable log, now long destroyed. By 1973, Evelyn traveled to Normandy under the guise of preparing a BBC documentary on D-Day logistics. Her research led her to local fishermen and farmers who recalled strange American engineers working near the bluffs after the landings. One farmer remembered a soldier who spoke French poorly but paid well for silence. Another claimed he had seen floodlights at night, long after combat had moved inland. Each story added weight to Evelyn's theory that Operation Tidefall had been real and possibly still classified. Her persistence, however, drew attention. Letters she sent to the Pentagon's historical branch went unanswered. Requests to the U.S. National Archives were returned stamped "Security Denied, NATO Classified." A friend within the British MOD warned her bluntly, "You're digging in the wrong beach. Some things are meant to stay buried." Harker noted that warning in her notebook, underlined twice. Still, she pressed on. During her final Normandy trip in 1974, she and a local guide located what appeared to be a reinforced concrete edge beneath a collapsed hedgerow near Vierville. The shape was too straight, too clean to be natural, she wrote in her field notes. They marked the site for a later return with equipment, but that expedition never happened. Days later, Evelyn's rented car was found abandoned near Bayou. Her notes were missing. French police ruled it a disappearance. Her passport was found weeks later washed up near Port-en-Bessin. No remains were ever identified. In her London apartment, colleagues found a sealed envelope addressed to the Times of London. Inside were copies of the Leland map, a transcript of her interviews, and a chilling final line: "I believe Operation Tidefall was never declassified because it was never meant to exist." The story made brief headlines before being buried under Cold War tension and government denials. Official spokesmen from both the US and UK dismissed her findings as conspiracy speculation and misinterpretation of wartime engineering activity. But within intelligence circles, Harker's name became a quiet cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened to those who strayed too close to sealed history. 50 years after D-Day, a single redacted memo surfaced during a Freedom of Information review. It contained only 2 sentences before the black bars began. Operation Tidefall site integrity confirmed. Civilian interference neutralized. Dated 1974. Evelyn Harker's disappearance remains one of the most haunting post-war mysteries connected to the Normandy invasion. Some say she drowned, others believe she was silenced. What's certain is that her work reignited interest in the hidden layers of World War II, proof that even decades later, the beaches of Normandy still kept their secrets. As Chapter 4 closes, the waves of Omaha whisper of more than the fallen. Beneath the memorials and flags, beneath the sand that hides so many stories, something still lies sealed, watched, protected, and forgotten. Next, we turn to the 1990s, when a new discovery would bring Operation Tidefall back into the light, and with it, the first tangible proof that the secret buried in 1944 was very real. By the 1990s, half a century had passed since D-Day. Omaha Beach had become a symbol of heroism. Its bunkers turned to memorials, its sand a pilgrimage ground for generations. Tourists walked the same shore where history was written, unaware that beneath their feet a deeper story slept. But time, as always, has a way of uncovering what men try to forget. In the summer of 1993, a French civil works team was conducting a coastal erosion study near Vierville-sur-Mer. The plan was simple: reinforce dunes and lay new drainage to preserve the coastline. But during excavation, a backhoe struck something solid, a slab of reinforced concrete buried almost 4 meters below the surface. "We thought it was just an old bunker," recalled site foreman Jean-Luc Perrin, "until we saw the angle. It was too smooth, too deliberate. What they had uncovered wasn't a bunker wall, but the corner of a subterranean structure, perfectly square, made of American steel and concrete. Inside the rubble, the crew found corroded ration tins stamped U.S. Army, 1944, along with fragments of wooden crates, their stenciled markings too faded to read. A small, partially preserved metal plate bore a cryptic inscription, property of U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The discovery immediately drew interest from French historians and local press. Within a week, American officials arrived, representatives, they claimed, from the U.S. Army Memorial Affairs Directorate. They quickly sealed the area and halted excavation, citing hazardous material and unexploded ordnance risk. But the French workers knew better. They moved fast, Perrin told reporters. Too fast for bureaucracy. It was like they were waiting for this to happen. For a brief moment, whispers of Operation Tidefall resurfaced. French newspaper West France ran a small column titled "Secret Bunker Discovered Under Omaha Beach." It mentioned that the structure did not appear on any Allied construction maps from 1944 to 45. The story caught the attention of Dr. Pierre Renard, a military historian at the University of Caen. Renard had been following the Evelyn Harker disappearance for years, and now he sensed connection. The location, he noted, matches her map almost exactly. Renard managed to photograph several unearthed fragments before the Americans sealed the site. One of them, a rusted bolt cap, bore an embossed serial number beginning with 91A, the same as the directive repeatedly cited in classified documents. When he tried to publish his findings, his university funding was abruptly withdrawn. He later remarked, "The closer I looked, the faster doors closed." Still, he refused to let the story die. Over the next 2 years, Renard conducted quiet interviews with aging Normandy residents. One elderly fisherman recalled seeing U.S. trucks unloading heavy crates at night 2 days after D-Day. Another swore he'd seen a large, tarp-covered object lowered into a pit near the same field. "They said it was a communications relay," he told Renard. "But we all knew it wasn't. The officers' faces told us so." The mystery deepened when Renard obtained declassified fragments from a 1944 logistical manifest, referencing an unlisted engineering consignment. Priority read. The consignment weight was listed as 2,600 pounds, far too heavy for radio equipment, but consistent with a mass of sealed archival or metal containers. Beneath it, someone had handwritten, "Hold for Tidefall." Renard's growing collection of evidence pointed to one conclusion: Operation Tidefall was not a myth. It was real, physical, and buried exactly where Evelyn Harker said it would be. Yet the deeper he dug, the more resistance he faced. His mail was tampered with. His interviews were shadowed by technical advisors from NATO's Historical Liaison Office. In 1997, he received an anonymous letter typed on yellowing paper. "Do not open the ground again. It was buried for a reason." History remembers enough ghosts. But Renard couldn't stop. He published a brief academic paper in 1998 titled The Lost Vault of Omaha Evidence of a Classified Allied Operation, June 1944. The article was swiftly retracted after security concerns. Copies were withdrawn, but PDFs circulated quietly online. Among his closing lines, Renard quoted an aging veteran who had served under Haynes's command. "We didn't bury a weapon. We buried a warning." To this day, no one knows what that meant. But the site was once again recovered in 1999, this time with reinforced layers of gravel and concrete, officially to protect historical integrity. Since then, no excavations have been permitted within 300 meters of the original coordinates. Standing on Omaha Beach today, it's hard to imagine that under the calm surf and shifting dunes lies a relic of a war whose secrets refuse to rest. For the engineers who built it, the journalists who chased it, and the historians who tried to expose it, Operation Tidefall became more than a hidden vault. It became a symbol of what nations choose to remember and what they force themselves to forget. The mystery feels tangible again. The vault beneath Omaha Beach was real. It was found. And yet, it was buried once more, this time by those tasked with protecting history itself. In our final chapter, we return to the present day, where new technology and digital archives may finally hold the key to uncovering what was hidden under the sands of victory for over 80 years. In the present day, Omaha Beach glistens beneath the pale French sun. Tourists wander the sands where freedom was won, unaware that beneath their feet lies one of the last unresolved enigmas of World War II. 8 decades have passed since Operation Tidefall was buried, literally and historically. But thanks to declassified documents, digital mapping, and satellite ground-penetrating radar, the whispers have returned louder than ever. In 2019, a French-American joint research team from the University of Caen and MIT began a high-resolution subsurface scan of the Normandy coastline. Their project aimed to identify lost bunkers and ordnance still buried in the sand. Yet in the Vierville sector, one anomaly stood out: a perfect geometric void measuring roughly 12 meters across and 6 meters deep, reinforced with high-density material. The report described it simply: subterranean cavity inconsistent with known wartime structures. When journalists asked the U.S. Department of Defense for comment, they declined, stating only that no classified military facilities are known to exist in the Normandy region. But privately, members of the team reported quiet visits from American embassy officials. They weren't hostile, one researcher admitted. But they made it clear: do not publish the coordinates. The resurgence of interest reignited old stories: Evelyn Harker's disappearance, Dr. Renard's suppressed research, and the fate of Captain Walter Haynes. Through modern archival digitization, a handful of new files emerged from the chaos of wartime bureaucracy. One of them, marked Special Engineering Operations European Theater, contained a redacted after-action report. Amid the blacked-out lines, 2 words stood visible: Directive 91A executed. Below it, a handwritten note in faded pencil, seal confirmed. Containment maintained. Containment. It was a word rarely used in engineering reports. Historians speculated endlessly about what it might have meant: biological, technological, psychological. Was Operation Tidefall designed to hide a weapon or the knowledge of one? Some believed it involved the early development of signal encryption technology, prototypes meant to alter how military communication worked in occupied Europe. Others proposed something darker: confiscated German intelligence materials related to mind control or propaganda research. The fact that both the US and UK maintained joint secrecy over the operation long after the war suggested something beyond standard military concern. A recently declassified British memo from 1946 may offer the clearest clue yet. It reads, "Contents deemed too destabilizing for post-war disclosure. Recommendation: permanent concealment, Anglo-American oversight." What could be so destabilizing that both nations agreed it must remain buried forever? Today, that buried chamber is marked on no maps. It lies somewhere beneath a field between Vierville and Saint Laurent, covered by grass, memorial stones, and silence. French law prohibits excavation near Allied cemeteries, ensuring Operation Tidefall will remain untouched. The ground itself has become its final guardian. But modern historians, journalists, and digital sleuths continue to search. Through Freedom of Information requests, one document finally surfaced in 2023, a simple, typewritten summary attached to a faded photograph of uniformed engineers at Omaha Beach. The note reads, "Project concluded. Vault secure. Directive 91A, the fewer who know, the safer the victory." Those words echo eerily through time. They suggest that whatever was hidden beneath Omaha Beach was not only secret, it was considered dangerous to the very peace the Allies had fought to achieve. As the waves continue to lap against Normandy's shores, the tide erases footprints daily, just as time erases memory. Yet some truths refuse to disappear. The story of Operation Tidefall is no longer just about what was buried. It's about the human instinct to conceal what we fear, even in victory. Maybe Captain Haynes was right when he told his men, "Some victories depend on what we hide, not what we show." 80 years later, the question remains unanswered, echoing through sand, steel, and silence. What did America bury beneath the beaches of Normandy? And why does the world still fear to uncover it?